Hello, everyone, and welcome to Maritime SheEO 2.0 panel session on best practices and the business case for diversity. My name is Yogita, and I'm honored to be here as a session moderator. Before we start, I just want to like to thank Sanjam Gupta and offer her my felicitations for this initiative and all her work towards diversity in the maritime industry. So thank you, Sanjam, for that. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm Yogita Kapoor, and I'm currently working with ISF Group International Singapore as the Director of Global Marketing and Outreach. ISF Group is a knowledge consultancy and research solutions provider for the maritime organization and institutions and operating since last 20 years. And I'm joining this session from Japan. So as shared, this session is titled Best Practices and the Business Case for Diversity. And we have a fabulous panel with us today. So I would like to request all our panelists to please introduce themselves and do share where you're joining from currently. It will be really interesting to know. Guy, can we start with you, please?
I'm Guy Platten. I'm Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping.
Right. Hi, Guy. Geraldo, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. I'm Geraldo Boroomeo. They call me Dito. I am the Chief Executive of the PTC Group, and I'm based in Manila, Philippines.
Right. Harald, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting us to this discussion. My name is Harald Solberg. I'm the CEO of the Norwegian Shipowners Association, joining you from Oslo.
That's great. Captain Dwain?
Good day, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Dwain Hutchinson. I'm the Managing Director and CEO of the Bahamas Maritime Authority. Unfortunately, I'm not joining from the Bahamas. I'm actually presently in London enjoying the more sunnier climes.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Right. Cristina, can we have you?
Yes, thank you everyone for the invitation. I'm Cristina Saenz de Santa Maria. I'm Regional Manager for Southeast Asia, Pacific and India in DNV Maritime, joining from Singapore.
Right. And Heidi, up over to you.
Hi, I'm Heidi Heseltine. I'm the co-founder of the Diversity Study Group. I'm also CEO of Halcyon Recruitment, and I'm not in the Bahamas either, as much as I think we'd all like to be somewhere like that. I'm in London.
Right. So thank you everyone for joining, and I'm really excited to be here. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. I would like to start with a small overview of the topic, which is the business case for diversity. So business case for diversity basically means that there is growing evidence establishing a correlation between increased representation of women in the workplace or corporate leadership roles with stronger business outcomes for companies. And there have been several studies in this direction, like a McKinsey Global Institute report, which found that if women and men, they played an identical role in labor markets, the global economy would really boost by 2025. In a study of Fortune 500 companies by Capt, which is a non-profit setup, they found that firms with higher gender diversity in management had 35% better return on equity than firms with poor gender equality. And the same results were also echoed in a study by Ernst & Young, where they studied up to 200 companies. Further, a paper was established in the Human Resource Management Journal, actually, which shows that employees like working in diverse environments and they are less likely to leave, which in turn reduces the high costs of employee turnover. And further, there's a very interesting study by Berkeley Haas School of Business, which actually tries to correlate the diversity of thought through diversity of workforce, which is clearly evident in many areas, such as decisions relating to energy efficiency, lowering company costs, investing in renewable power generation. So it's very safe to say that there is a pretty strong business case that has been established over the years for gender diversity. So now I would like to turn to all the panelists, and I have this question actually for all of you, that how the ongoing discussion and consistent research which establishes this case has evolved your workplace environment in the last decade. So has the business case been instrumental in bringing about any change? And if not, how do you think the business case could be lacking? So if you have any personal experiences, you can share. Captain Dwain, can we start with you for this question, please?
Thank you, and certainly that's a brilliant introduction. And right, where do I begin? I think the first thing to say is, when when most people, and even when you think of this panel we're on now, that the inference to diversity automatically tends to shift to the gender diversity. But I think certainly from the Bahamas Maritime perspective, and certainly myself working within shipping, which is involved in a global sphere, involving multinational, I think the diversity extends not just beyond from the gender, but also the diversity in terms of the culture of individuals who you bring into your organization. Within the BMA, with our worldwide network of offices and our client base, it does mean that in order for us to be able to satisfy the needs of our customers, we have to understand what is the customer's expectation. And in doing that, you have to be mindful of all the nuances of culture, nationalities, and obviously bringing in the different elements from the gender diversity as well. So certainly from our business case, and looking at the Bahamas Maritime Authority, which we are a Bahamian company, but we operate offices, US, the UK, Greece, Japan, Hong Kong. So to only have our office staff by all Bahamian will not give us the ability to manage our office in an effective way, to give us all those divergent experiences and nuances that comes from bringing that diversity through nationalities and culture. And I think that transcends into our employment base, which is, I think we have it at the moment, but 12 different nationalities. We definitely have a split in terms of male, female, but I must confess, in the technical operational seafaring area, it's still very much skewed towards male. But that's something which I think, if you look at most companies, that balance is slowly being eroding. And even we're seeing it in the Bahamas, where as we're recruiting cadets coming, as we attracting cadets into the sector, we have a program called the Bahamas Maritime Cadet Corps. And of the participants coming through that program, we started out with about 10% of the students were female. And at the last graduation ceremony, and yes, we did have a graduation ceremony during COVID, albeit virtual with the relevant protocol. That's now risen from 10% back when the program started 10, 15 years ago to 43%. And more importantly, when you say top performers, the top performers in the class of this year, females carried it. And then the ones who went on to study at the university, they have all reached, the pinnacle of becoming valedictorian. So that shows you that everyone can perform the tasks and duties that we have in the maritime sector. But let's be clear, there are challenges. In a male-dominated industry like shipping, that bringing in of the more female into the industry, putting them on board ship. And I think me and Guy were on a panel several weeks ago where we saw some challenges that happened in the US. Getting the older generation, if I can use that term, but some would say I'm older now, to understand that there is, this need to understand diversity is the big challenge. When I went to sea, I'm from the Bahamas, I went on board a ship, I was the only Bahamian on it. I was the only person of color on that ship. So that was a major challenge for me, but it also gave me the strength and character. I'll probably come towards that towards the end, because that's something which we also have to be prepared to get the individuals who we're introducing to understand that challenges, because I think that's how they succeed. But is the business case there? Yes, I think it's there, but it's also bringing together all those different components to ensure that the individuals who we do bring in, we give them the tools they need to succeed. But I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, no, thanks, Captain. That does help a lot. Harald, over to you. Would you like to add something to this?
Yes, I would like to follow up the Captain Dwain on this issue, because I agree that we have multi-diverse companies within the shipping industry, and that's a great opportunity for us. But at the same time, we have to realize that we have great challenges as well. We are a male-dominated industry, and we need to speak about that, and we need to step up as an industry to attract talents from both genders, because we have very important tasks to deliver on. We have to develop new technology, we have to decarbonize our industry, we have to reduce the emissions from our industry, and at the same time we see a great development in the digital area, so we need to attract new competencies into our industry, and in this respect we need to attract new talents from both genders, and I think the opportunities they are based on our cultural approach. We are diverse industry from a cultural perspective, but we are a male-dominated from a gender perspective. So I think we have to overcome and to include more female talents into our industry. So we need to communicate the possibilities. We need to attract new talents, and I think this conference and putting this on the topic and discussing this issue is very important for the industry all over the world.
Right, well noted, Harald. I think Maritime SheEO also has a session on recruitment, and it will be very valuable if those recruitment tips can actually be spread wide and people can, implement on them. Heidi, I think you are also from a recruitment background, but mainly for shore-based employees. Would you like to add to what Harald said?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my background shipping through and through. So I've been in the industry 30 years, but used to do like the front line and then moved into recruitment and now diversity and inclusion. I think all of the statistics that you mentioned in terms of supporting D&I, they speak for themselves. We know about them. We know it can work. I think in terms of, so has it been instrumental in bringing about change? Yes. Has it brought about change in shipping? Not so much yet. And I think we've got two very clear sides here in terms of where we need to focus. One is the seafarers, the other is the shore. And it doesn't mean that we have to apply, we can't apply exactly the same approaches to both. They each have very, very differing requirements. What are we lacking in shipping? I agree with everything that Dwain has said, everything Harald has said, to a point, in the sense that I think our perception in shipping is that we are diverse. And certainly from a nationality point of view, we're diverse. And from a gender point of view, we're not. But actually, when you look at the data that we have, and that's the data that we've started gathering, and there isn't that much data in shipping, particularly on the shore-based side, so we're in our second year. But actually, when you look at that data, we're diverse in pockets. And so if you look at an organisation and an organisation feels they're gender diverse, but 74% of those women sit in professional services, to me, that's not diversity. And if you look at it from a nationality point of view, and you have an 80% white male management level across the industry, shore-based, not diverse. So for me, I think we've got a lot of work to be doing, and a part of that is our own perception of ourselves. We've got to hold the mirror up, and that's why we're gathering the data, is to hold that mirror up and say, actually, let's have a look at where we're at. And I think even those, for the argument for moving it forward, we need business leaders to take it on as part of their risk management strategy, because what's going to happen if you don't adopt this? You're going to lose out. The industry is going to lose out. As organisations, we're going to lose out. And all of those, the McKinseys and the studies that have been done in terms of it's good for your creativity and your innovation and your engagement, absolutely, we'll miss out on all of that as well. And one of the examples in sort of like the wider business space I quite like is the one of Apple. So when Tim Cook took over as CEO from Steve Jobs, the shareholders looked at him and thought, how is he going to match what his Steve Jobs did? Not exceed, but match. And actually, he took this company, put 3 women on the executive team. He brought in directors from underrepresented groups. He reviewed all of the talent hiring, retention practices, started an annual inclusion and diversity survey, which is also published publicly. And he completely transformed what Apple are doing. So they took a company that was actually doing really well, and many might see it as, well, they're okay on diversity. But actually, if you look at a company like that and how they can do even better. You know, the share price went from, what was it, $53 to $249. And their social brand, which for the talent of the future is really, really important, has also gone from strength to strength. So I think there's a huge amount in shipping that we can learn. But the great thing is we're talking about it. And that's one of the first steps in order to improving it.
Right. More importantly, talking about it in the right direction. So I'm sure the next step will be great. Yeah. Cristina, can I ask you to?
Yes, thank you so much. I mean, I very much agree with my fellow panelists. I think from my experience, certainly the business case has made that we speak about it. So it's on the table and it's part of the discussion. However, the difficulty is to change how we are used to work, right? So, I mean, we talk about diversity and inclusion. To me, diversity is the easy part. It's like, you know, to invite someone to a party. The inclusion is to invite someone to dance. I mean, I think that that's the trickiest part. And again, it comes to change management, and we know that that's difficult for everyone. Just to share an experience from our company, DNB, that we did, because all senior managers are totally committed to this. But as I said, for example, we are unconscious bias. So all of our senior managers, we have gone through unconscious bias lengthy session, and it is really an eye-opener. And I mean, this just shows that people that are committed, even people that are committed, like me, myself, we have unconscious bias that, you know, hidden than us, you know, to have a more inclusive and diverse workforce. So there's a lot of work to do for all of us. And again, it's not that we can overcome everything, but at least being aware of it and wanting to change. So I would say that that's my take on it.
Right, Christine. Thanks. Yeah, Gerard, can we ask you to share your thoughts?
Sure. As I listened to the panel, I was thinking about which angle to take.
Right.
And if I do it specifically from our own company, the PTC group has really, for the last 43 years, lived with this type of a core where we don't really make a distinction because it seems to have been part of our DNA. To give you an idea, when the company was first started, 5 out of its 6 top leaders were female. Today, out of the top 2, 1 is male and the other is female. And out of 17 top executives, 7 are female. And if I look at it from the technical perspective, we have 46 crewing managers on the shipping side, 26 of whom are female. So I sometimes feel like I'm an outlier in all of this, but it seems to be part and parcel of our work, and maybe it is something to do with our country's culture. We're very much a matriarchal society. If you look at the gender gap reports that are published, if you look at statistics, the Philippines is ranked 17th in the world in these gender gap issues. In Asia Pacific, we are, I think, number 4, we're number 2, second to New Zealand, who is ranked 4th in the world. So I think we've made some strides, but that's not to say that there aren't any issues. And I agree with the panelists, there are issues. And part of understanding the issues, I guess, has to go with defining the workplace, defining the kind of work that needs to be done. And if we now talk specifically about shipping and the maritime world, as what Harald and Dwain have pointed out, we need to probably look at the work functions and see if structurally these work functions have to be redefined on board the ship, similar to the way work functions are defined and redefined on the shore side. And whatever it is we're doing on the shore side, we need to bring to the ship side in order to be able to ensure that the environment will be conducive to allowing for this diversity, whether it's a diversity of culture, a diversity of gender, a diversity of thought. There is strength in diversity, but it's how we manage it. And the other aspect, and I think the last aspect of what we need to do is, as we talk about these things, we create a better image of who we are as individuals, who we are as an organization, and who we are as an industry. And as we come together to talk about this, then we can encourage the subsequent generations for appealing to them and encouraging them to consider a career, say, in shipping or a career at sea. But we have to work that out. I mean, that's going to evolve. And the better and the more structured the discussion that takes place, I think the faster we'll get down that curve. Not without challenges, but like I said, in our organization, it's a bit alien to me because we've never had these biases. I mean, in fact, I appreciate the diversity, whether it's in gender or in background, because that's how we try to get the results in a more effective manner.
Right, that's very great and encouraging to know. Yeah, Guy, can I ask you to share your thoughts on this, please?
Yeah. Thank you so much. The only trouble with going last is that everyone else has said so much of what I wanted to say. It's really insightful comments from the rest of the panelists. So the unconscious bias that Heidi talked about, that's really important as well. We know study after study, and is that if you can, and also Cristina talked about, is that can really help. We are missing out on opportunity now. You know, we're talking about coming out of COVID-19. We're talking about a decarbonisation of our industry. This is going to present so many opportunities that if we fail to attract 50%, if we're just talking about sex here now, 50% of the workforce we're just excluding, then we're just, you know, we're not doing ourselves any favours whatsoever. So that's something that does need to be challenged and presents an opportunity for us, I think, going forward. But we do need to accept that there is some attitudes on board ships and ashore which need to be challenged. I know from my own daughter's experience that some of the experience that she had on board ships from, you know, I won't say the nationality of a particular officer is concerned, but she was subjected to some quite awful incidents as part of her training. And that's partly cultural, that's partly the attitude of the individuals concerned, but we do also need to educate our existing workforce as well as the needs of diversity and why we're doing it, and we need to show some understanding for their entrenched attitudes, and we do need to challenge them going forward. And the other thing I think is it Dito on how we describe roles going forward. That's vitally important. You know, we need to demonstrate that we're a forward-looking modern industry, that we welcome people of all cultures, all backgrounds, and sexes as well, and to see that they feel part of what we're doing going forward. I think the young people have got that they see it. I see my own children, how they approach the whole diversity issue. They just don't even see it because they're just with all these people. But I do think there was a cohort of an older generation which we need to challenge so that we can properly build an industry fit for everybody going forward. But just in closing, I do feel that there's so much opportunity there now that that if we're working together, having panels like this, challenging it, coming forward with solutions and ideas to make it better, will serve us so much well in the long term.
Right. Thanks, Guy. Thank you, everyone. Actually, this has been very useful. I see from everyone's experiences that although we have a business case very strong, established, the changes that we have seen in the shipping industry have not exactly reflected what the business case really implies. Of course, Geraldo has had a different experience, but for many of us, we've not seen that. And in spite of it being so overwhelming, I also fear that often when people see the business case, they see it purely as an academic study, which they can read and really appreciate. But when it comes to practical implementation, that is where they genuinely miss out on how will it finally come together. And actually, that's why I really like this session put together. So we're not just discussing the business case, but what it actually means practically day to day in the workplace. So with that, I would like to ask you some questions about how we can implement some of these practices. Cristina, if I can start with you, as you said, you work at DNV, it's a global organization. So can you share your experiences on what are some of the practical practices that have been implemented to attain and maintain diversity? And what is the impact of it, on a global organization such as yours? Yeah.
Thank you. So I would say first we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it a lot with employees, with colleagues, because actually each of us has a different understanding of what diversity is and a different perception, and it means different things. So in order to involve that inclusion part, right, we need to understand where we are. Actually today I've been spending 3 hours talking about diversity and inclusion with fellow colleagues, right? So I would say that that's definitely the first step. Second step, I would say, let's use the data and understand where we are. What's our baseline, right? Just to get a feel of that. Then we need to, of course, have a senior management commitment that walk the talk, but that have also clear go-to KPIs. Because when there's something to be measured, then there's work towards that.
Right.
And then, of course, once you have the KPIs, we need to have the gaps where, okay, what is missing, and then works towards it. And there's no easy solution because it starts, of course, from recruiting. We know that maybe some companies might not be recruiting a lot. So what do you do? But we need to start somewhere. And it is very important that this is just not another corporate initiative, you know, that you speak about for 3 months and then you move over to the next one. So it's better, I think, to take small steps, but talk about them and have the ambitions and take it from there.
Right. Thanks, Cristina. Guy, would you also like to share your experiences at ICS on what have been some practices for maintaining diversity? And if you can share some challenges that you may have experienced while going forward with them.
So thank you. We set up we have a dedicated panel looking at diversity and inclusion and equality as well. And we've developing a toolkit which we'd like companies to look at as well going forward, seagoing companies in particular going forward. So some practical things for them to sign up to and commit. And I know Heidi's been doing a lot of work in this field as well, which is to be applauded, absolutely applauded as well. We need companies to not just speak the speak, they need to walk the walk as well in all of these different areas. So that's been rolled out, and we hope that can have a difference. But I think it's also making the sound business case to companies. It's their own self-interest to embrace diversity, because by doing so, they'll actually increase what's on the bottom line, because they've got the right balance. And we all know study after study shows a diverse boardroom is a boardroom which functions at a much higher level than one which is got a particular, you know, it's all men or even all women. It's much better if it's diverse, because, you know, everyone comes with their own different skills and experiences which they can build, which they can deliver to a company. And it's really interesting detail saying from the get-go, the diversity there at the top level. And I'm sure that's the reason why 43 years later, a PTC is such an amazing success story. I'm sure that's no coincidence. And we need to sort of highlight these sort of things going forward. So we do need to overall, I think, get these discussions are really, really important, but we also need to be out there and actually putting in proactive steps in place now. I think Dwain said, was it 43% of your cadets coming through a female now, Dwain? They're the practical steps, and we know some cruise companies are doing likewise, and we need to encourage that throughout, because only by doing that can we actually move forward and actually look at the other issues that are affecting our industry.
Right. Actually, that gives me another question, and I would actually like to ask the entire panel, what are your thoughts on some of these practices, you know, which are like creating diversity groups or placing mentorship programs within organizations, or having regular orientation or briefing? I mean, if anybody can share their experience with some of these practices, like mentoring and, you know, or maybe women's events which happen regularly. So I'll throw it to the panel if anybody has any thing to share here. Geraldo, yeah, please go ahead. You have
well, you know, I mean, I started off by saying that it is a concept that is a little bit alien to me when you talk about forcing diversity. On the other hand, as we talk about it, my concern now is how do we preserve what we have that is so good, which means that the narrative that has to go out has got to be able to project the proper image. So our biggest challenge is to ensure, how do we sell ourselves as a company? How do we sell our environment? How do we sell our industry? And so one of the questions I think that you would pose is, how do you memorialize this? Do we have to create a policy or a framework? And what might have been unconscious with no biases, maybe because of cultural nuances that we have built on, we need to make sure that as generations change and the mindsets change and as people's thinking change, that we need to preserve what succeeded and improve on them in order to continue to ensure that diversity provides the strength. So yes, we're working on the framework, and maybe now we're making some more conscious decisions where in the past it was unconscious. But part of it really is to ensure that we must first define the workplace as a workplace that is respectful of people, a workplace that encourages the best and brightest. And we if you look at the population of our country, we're 50-50. So you have a 50% chance of getting the right person, male or female. So it's up to us to be able to sell ourselves, because we are competing with many other qualified, better qualified, bigger qualified companies. And so we have to make the case for why you want to work with us. And what Harald and Dwain talked about was the fact that maybe we need to define well, for example, a career at sea, and start to take baby steps. Heidi talked about this journey, and Cristina said it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a while. But the concerted effort for defining the end goal and working backwards to create milestones by which we can all, as trade associations, as national associations, as industry groups, and as corporations, begin to define the steps that are necessary so you can have the KPIs. I think that's important. And so from our perspective, we have to preserve what has helped us over the last 43 years, because you can't just assume that that's going to be the case in the future.
Yeah, right. I agree. Geraldo, thanks. So Heidi, actually, let me come to you. We have discussed some of the practices, KPI, putting policies in place, etc. And you've been part of the diversity study group. So I wanted to ask you, let's say if you were to give tips to a company who's trying to implement D&I, diversity and inclusion, that is, what would be the starting point? What would be most easiest for them to implement, and what practices would have a more lasting impact in the culture of the organization?
I think it goes back to what I was saying before, Yagas, which is, as an industry, we need to hold a mirror up, and as organizations, we need to hold the mirror up to ourselves. The first thing before you can really strive to change your diversity demographics, if, assuming that's what you do need to do or decide you want to do, is you've got to get that culture right. And everybody here's, spoken about the fact your working environment, your culture has got to be one that's supportive of your employees, your existing employees. They need to be themselves when they come to work. They've got to have an environment where they can speak up, where they can put forward ideas, where management know how to get the best ideas out of individuals and appreciate, what is diversity? Is diversity about having people of different genders or nationalities? Yes, it's to do with it, but real diversity is about embracing different perspectives. And if you're going to embrace different perspectives, you've got to have your existing team and your existing employees throughout the organization, from top to bottom, and all the way across, understanding that that's the culture we're aiming for, and that's what we're going to embrace. So for me, in terms of the practices, you start with the working environment, you start with a culture. Then when you look at moving on to actually implementing your D&I strategy, you do that through a data-driven approach, because actually when you hold up that mirror, you may well find, and a lot of organizations find, that what they think was going to be their main area of the priority focus actually isn't. And we've seen that within the DSG. When we look at the data we have, we've got obviously a lot of data on gender, but actually what's also coming through is there's a fair amount on that inclusion and the culture element, and different cultures feeling safe to speak up and others feeling much less safe to speak up at work. So I would say that there's other work that some organizations may need to be doing more. And then when you look at sort of like any practice, you've got to get the executive management buy-in. It's got to be a business priority. If it's not going to be sustainable. You've got to have adequate resources behind it, because if you as a leader are going to want this to be sustainable, you've got to commit the resources. And I mean time, people, training, communication is critical in the success of this. And then it's the objectives, it's the evaluation, and it's continually coming back to this, because Cristina hit the nail on the head when she first spoke, which is, this is something that is going to take a long time. And it's all of these bits working together. But if you don't have that holistic plan in the first place, and you just take little bits because you think it's the right thing to do, it's going to have a positive impact in some ways, but nowhere near in the same way it can if you really treat it as a much longer business strategy and more of a business transformation, I would say.
Right. Thanks, Heidi. We have to treat it as an evolutionary process that will happen in the right direction. Captain Dwain, if I may come to you, just extending on that, did speak a bit about the seafaring experience, and if we were to implement better practices for diversity inclusion on a sea, so other than all we have spoken about, what more would we require for seafarers? Would it be change in different kind of policies or even infrastructures and setups that are currently there on ships? Could you elaborate on that?
No, thank you. And sitting with Dito and obviously Guy, who are ship owners and seafarers, company representation, I think it's really going to come back to the company, how the company treat those seafarers and how they advocate the roles of those seafarers, on board the ship and when they come ashore. I mean, what I would hate to, I say hate to happen, I think we don't want to go down this process. I know some countries may have done where we start regulating that companies have to do X, Y, Z in terms of diversity. And I think that was one of, when I said one of the challenges, and when you talk about diversity, you always run into that, that concept that, oh, you're only doing it because I am of this nationality or gender. And I think you want to have persons in a role who are capable, have the ability, and can demonstrate that they can do it. I think the diversity call will be undermined in itself if it starts just pushing diversity for diversity's sake. I like what Heidi said certainly from a shipboard perspective. That aspect of empowerment is going to be critical as well, empowering the seafarers to understand, to speak up and hear their views. I think visibility, I went to Sea Trade Cruise Global about 2 years ago, and it was the first time they had a panel. The keynote speakers were all female chief executive of cruise companies. So when any individual gets to see someone like them, they then have that aspiration that, yes, that can happen. And I think that is slowly happening in the maritime sector on board ships. You know, the cultural aspect, I think, again, looking at some groups within the seafarers, you tend to see a lot of nationalities who are maybe at one level as seafarers, but you don't see them at a different level. So, you know, and Heidi may be able to see this in our studies, and I certainly saw it when I went on board some ships, that you have nationalities who were always junior officers, but for some reason never got to senior officers. You know, what was the correlation between that? And again, it may be where there's unconscious bias, where there's the aspiration, where there's the system that is in place. But what I wouldn't want to happen as a regulator is to start putting down regulation, because I think that will undermine the natural. If we're going to do this, let's do it because it's the right thing to do. Not let's do it because you're pushed into, because I think that will unbalance the whole thrust of what's being you want to achieve. But over the years, and as we move, certainly in the last year, couple of years, you will see, we talked about communication, and that's what's happening a lot more. There's a lot more communication going on. A lot of things that was being kept under the rug, they actually, you know, nowadays, certain behaviors are not accepted anymore. And because it's not accepted, you will get more diverse personnel, nationalities coming into this. Listen, I'm proud to say that this is an exciting sector with a number of different opportunities. You know, and I think that once they see that, yes, this is an all-embracing sector, we will see more females. So we'll have the gender issue getting addressed. We'll have the nationality aspect getting addressed. We'll have the wealth issue, because again, I'm from the Caribbean. You may have, you know, you may have a person from the African subcontinent who cannot get into the maritime sector because they don't see it. They see it as more an elite. So diversity is such a major spread, but I believe that the fact that we're having the conversation is important, and I think that's certainly something you know, I'd like to see continue. And my last point, and even looking at this panel years ago, this panel would have just been, you know, all male, an all white male, and then slowly you see the balance. I think we're on the right trajectory, and we just need to keep that going. And the next CEO, I'm sure that me, Dito, and Guy, and Harald, we want to be sitting back in the audience and looking at all female talking their story. But anyway, But that's my perspective for now. Thank you.
Right. Thanks. That's great. That's great, Dwain. Harald, if I can just come to you. Of course, we have discussed some part on seafaring and shore-based employees both. I just want to ask you from a business association perspective. You're from Norwegian ship owners. From that perspective, how can you push members or member organizations to prioritize diversity and inclusion, and especially the ones who find it difficult to prioritize? I mean, they think they have bigger issues in front of them which take priority otherwise. So can you throw some light on?
Thank you, Geraldo. I think ship owners associations plays an important role, and we have a specific responsibility in this issue, and we can push along different avenues. I think it is very important for us to raise awareness about this issue among our members. And we can use our platform to share best practice and also share experiences among members on how to open up male-oriented cultures, both onshore and also for seafarers. And I think we also can make a difference in developing and encouraging new leaders. And we in Norway have very good experience in participating in, for instance, Vista's mentor program. And I think we can increase that effort even more in the future. We can definitely set goals, establish milestones, as Dito alluded into, and we should and could also measure these goals through annual surveys. And I think it's very important for us also to walk the talk in our own organization. In Norwegian Ship Owners Association, we have only 20% women in our board for now. And I'm sure we will be more than 40% after the next election. And in our administration, we are in fact 60% women and 40% men. And I think it's very important for us to walk the talk in our own organization. And last point is that I think we also have great responsibility to work with the image of our industry. We are, from the public side, assumed as both traditional and conservative industry, and we should work hard to change this into a picture of innovative and exciting industry with a lot of opportunities going forward.
Right. Thanks a lot, Harald. Geraldo, I have just one last question for you. Of course, you spoke about the cultural nuances already, but you also expressed your fear of having this diversity that PTC Group, for example, has been slipped out. And so going forward, what kind of practices do you think would be essential for nationalities like Philippines to make sure that the diversity is maintained, what they have achieved carries on forward?
If I look at it from the country's perspective, one of the things that our country has been known for is our diaspora. Many of our countrymen have left the country, both male and female. And maybe when we start to talk about perspectives, whether diversity, inclusion, or any of these things, we probably need to think and consider not just what happens in the workplace, but we need to consider the issues of the family as well. And why do I say this? We have, for example, a sector of our society that leaves, which are mostly women. And when they leave, the family unit has got to be taken care of by the father, who assumes everything within the home, children, home, etc., and work. And the same thing happens. And if you want to look at the other extreme today, based on the nuances of the shipping industry, it tends to be a male-dominated field. And when the male leaves, of course, they leave the strength of the home and watching over the kids. And so that has to factor in somewhere into the equation. I mean, if we want to force diversity, sure, let's make sure that the perspectives are clear, that the objectives are clear, and that the ability to create an environment that is welcoming to all is clear. And then you give people a choice. But I'd want to make sure, to Dwain's point, that we don't force a number, we don't regulate that, because at the end of the day, when we talk about what happens in the workplace, I don't know that we can necessarily talk about that without considering what happens at home, within the family unit. And one of the strengths of our country has been the strength of the family unit and our resiliency through the ups and downs. We haven't done the best, compared to other countries, but we've got an innate strength. And balancing off what happens in the home and with the family unit and at work are also factors that I think we should consider. So the tip would be, or some tips, the takeaways would be, understand what we're trying to achieve. Define as best as possible what the objective is, the time frame, the KPIs, as Heidi pointed out, And let's make sure that we're talking about the same thing and that it is not a zero-sum output in just one location, which is the workplace. But we need to understand the nuances that happen between and among people, both at work and at home, in order to be able to define what is really best for the country as a whole to move forward. And I think that if, as we talk about these issues of diversity, which really, I think I like the word perspective, what we're trying to do is at the end of the day, achieve the best way forward. And in achieving the best way forward, I think it's balancing what happens at work with what happens at home and with family life. And I think as far as the Philippines is concerned, we've tried to achieve that. We haven't done it perfectly. We have a lot more to learn. And so I appreciate listening and gathering the different perspectives that have been shared here, because through that, to come full circle to your question, then we can begin to frame exactly how we should go out and perhaps institutionalize what may have been an unconscious a mechanism that we used in the past, and knowing that the future, the next generations have different mindsets. They have different nuances. They will approach culture from a different perspective, and we have to do our fair share to attract the best and brightest.
Right. Thank you, Geraldo. Thank you so much. I think this session has been extremely informative for me as well, because I have to admit, when I talk about or when I think about best practices, I used to see it like a checklist. So we have this list and we can implement it. But talking to all of you has really shown me that we have to consider it, as I think all of you and Heidi especially mentioned, as an evolutionary process. We fix our KPIs. Through that, we see what we want to achieve. We use the practices in order to achieve that. And each time we try to progress and monitor the progress at each point. And I think before or alongside doing all this, we make sure that the people who work for us currently have that safe space, feel included in the current scenario, and make sure that their work-life balance is actually taken care of by their employers. So I think this has been a great session, especially, I mean, I have to say I did learn a lot. And I also hope that our audience, whoever seeing this, will see how the moral, ethical, and the business case, like how it all comes together, and the well-established practices, as you all have shared today, they can really help with diversity and inclusion. And I'm also sincerely hoping that we have been able to inspire some individuals who would like to be ambassadors and advocates of diversity at their own workplace, even if their leaders or their peers may not have thought of it or may not have started. So this is my final question to all of you today. What advice do you have for these individuals who want to start and be diversity inclusion advocates at their workplace? So Heidi, can I start with you?
Yes, and it's a great question. And actually, when we're out in the workplace, one that I'm being asked more and more by people, what can I do to make a difference? I'm not a manager, but I'd like to make a difference. And I think there's lots of things people can do. And I think actually for leaders, it's lead by example. So Geraldo was talking about a really important point. What do we do to support families? How do we embrace the work-life balance as well and be mindful of it? One of the things we've seen post-COVID, and I think one of the benefits for the industry of COVID, is flexible working. And we can't ignore the fact that that has shifted the workplace dramatically, and it needed to happen. Obviously, I would have been much happier had it not been for COVID, but let's take this as a sort of a win for the situation, because it's allowed us to have our working community at home, which has in many ways benefited families, and it's also had some detrimental impacts, I think, in other places, but it's allowed us to see it's doable. And I think when I'm talking about leading by example, it's about fathers also taking the opportunity to work from home, and even if they don't have to. It's about taking the time to sit back and take advantage of any working options you've got available to you, parental leave, as I say, the work from home, and making sure that it isn't just, when it comes to gender, a female scenario. It's applicable to anybody. I think in terms of other things, Dwain's made a really good point about, look at the panel here. We've got a really interesting demographic makeup. And I know from dealing with people within some of the DSG members, they will not now take place on a panel if it's not diverse in some form or another. That's something everybody can do. We had Youngship taking place last week. They were making sure that their panels were diverse as well. And that's something each individual can take responsibility for. And it's about being there to listen and to learn from our peers, to appreciate the different perspectives that people can bring, And that for me is the biggest benefit of all of this work that we're trying to do. Is it's about our industry, but it's also the social benefits. And we've mentioned about the children. Guy mentioned about his daughter. And I know we've spoken about her before and the impact she's having. We've all, it's about the fact that, I've got a daughter who's 16 and, she's comes back and amazes me with some of her, perspectives. So what we're doing and what we're talking about isn't just benefiting the workplace, it's actually having a social impact as well. So for me, carry on talking about it, try and lead by example, and let's continue the work we're doing within shipping. We've still got a long way to go, but it's that collaboration that also is critical to it. So that's my takeaway.
Right, thanks. Guy, would you have any advice for?
Yeah, thanks. I think really, really powerful, Heidi, and you can't really question anything you just said there. It's up to advocates to come in and challenge and question the status quo a little bit coming in and not being afraid to do so. But ultimately, a culture of an organisation will only change if the person at the top is embracing these values. It just it stops at the top and it starts at the top. So you talked, Heidi, about Apple. It's because of that leadership that the changes happen, and I think each one of us on the panel today is fortunate to be in a real leadership role. So it's what we do personally to encourage diversity in our workplace that then filters through, and it gives everyone the okay that it's okay to have a diverse workforce, and that needs to be embraced. So I think we've got an incredibly important role to play ourselves, and we need to actually believe in diversity and inclusion, because if we do, the rest of the workforce will come with us on that journey.
Right. Harald, can I ask you for any advice? Harald, what do you?
Yes, my advice to young ambassadors is trust yourself, challenge status quo, and bring forward good proposals for change. And to leaders, lead by example and walk the talk.
Right. Geraldo, can I ask you?
Open mindset, respect for a difference in opinion, and try as much as possible to avoid biases. I know it's difficult, but if you can keep an open mind, minimize the biases, and have respect, then that will encourage a more inclusive discussion, taking into consideration the different perspectives, and hopefully that serves as the catalyst for bringing us forward into a more relevant and more positive working environment.
Right. Cristina?
So I would say as well, walk the talk, lead by example, and don't make diversity and inclusion yet another initiative. Embed it in whatever is going on in the company, so that it doesn't lose momentum, so that we are making sure that this will continue moving forward.
Right. And Dwain?
Well, everyone said everything what I was going to say, but I think it's openness, empowerment, but I'll go back to the example I gave when I first went to sea, and Guy I remember going on the bridge, 18-year-old, and the captain was there, and I asked a question, but I just asked it to the captain. And back then, you were not allowed to speak to the captain. You have to filter it all through, roll forward. So if you're coming into a workplace and you think a model in place isn't right, you need to be prepared to challenge that. Because what you will find is that, going back to that unconscious bias and the old school, if you take what you did when you first come into the industry, and I think this is why we have to be very careful how we nurture the new personnel coming into an organization, because certainly if they see the norm, we talk about leadership, the norm is the CEO or the managing director ignores everyone other than this leading team, they will never speak up. And all those brilliant ideas that you had are lost. So I think you're right. First of all, be prepared to ask questions, challenge, but also be prepared to have a rational explanation given. It can be, that's how we always done it. Again, that's the other issue you had. We always did it this way. As Heidi said, come post-COVID, I say working alongside COVID, the way we used to work then is not necessarily the way we want to work going forward. And that it includes how we work as a team. So that's what I certainly have brought in the chair, and I'm sure most people have brought in, that is this a sense of empowerment, listening to everyone. And one of the favorites saying my team always say that when they'll tell me something, so you didn't act upon it. I says, hang on, I took it into consideration. Now they may not see the outcome straight away. And I think that's the other thing, the ambassador, you need to be prepared to be patient, because your eye there, it may not be something that the leader could implement overnight. There's other factors. And then a year later, you say, oh, I see now we're working, like Heidi said, we're working at these hours. So they have listened to me. So that's patience. But then certainly I agree with everyone is that as a leader, unless you practice what you preach, you will have those, those ambassadors just losing faith. But I have a lot of faith in this industry. I think we're evolving. Some say we're evolving slowly, but I think COVID, like it or I know it's sort of an unfortunate way for us to progress, but it has led to us progressing out of necessity. And I would hate for us to go backwards because I see a lot of positive areas from all different aspects of the business, including diversity, inclusion, and more importantly, communication and understanding the worth of all your employees, even if they're not sitting right next to you, because everyone is putting in their work, but they don't have to be sitting next to you.
Right, Capt. Dwain, I completely agree. And I have actually experienced this in the last 1 year, that I feel closer to my colleagues working from Singapore or Mumbai than I ever used to. So that's great. Yeah, thanks. So this was actually the last segment of our panel session. I'm genuinely hoping that organizations and individuals listening in have really valuable takeaways from all of you. And I would just like to thank all of you for coming for this panel session today. I think an underlying meaning within all this, the gender diversity, the business case, is also that diverse and inclusive companies can produce really strong outcomes for their own organizations, but also for the nations that they are in. They can strengthen economies, they can catalyze social development, they can support their nations towards a journey of self-reliance. And so I think we make a very strong case. And I personally very strongly believe that we should aim at normalization of diversity and inclusion, and normalization being the key word. It should not surprise us anymore. And I feel only then will our efforts truly be fruitful. So with that, I would like to thank you all again for joining in this session. It has been really valuable, and definitely for me, I believe. And thank you, everyone. I hope you all take care and be safe.